Australia is now officially at its 10 years high in terms of affordability, both in terms of cost of living and lower rate of pay rise. However, there's this common saying that Australians earn more and spend less compared to New Zealanders. As a matter of fact, 500,000 Kiwis are now living in Australia. Therefore, in this video, I'll investigate what's the real difference in cost of living across income, tax rate, everyday pricing, house prices, rents, transportation, and utilities between the two countries. First, let's start with income. In Australia, according to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, the average salary is $78,000. However, when you look at New Zealand, it's only $60,000, a full 26% less than Australia. Wait, but how about the richest 1% of both countries? In Australia, the top 1% earns from $353,000 and above, while you only need $250,000 to be in the top 1% of New Zealanders. Now from this, you might be quick to conclude that Aussies earn more than Kiwis, but I would strongly advise against that until we look at their tax rates, since the figures I gave before were before tax income, and we know that Australia is known for their high taxes. So as you can see here, it's obvious that while Australia has a slightly lower tax rate for the much lower threshold of $18,000 to $45,000 being 16%, its tax rate is a lot higher while you earn more in Australia. So for example, if you earn more than $190,000, you'll be paying 45% marginal tax rate instead of 39% in New Zealand. Let's look at an example of someone earning $100,000 AUD in both countries, exclusive of supers and Kiwi savers. If you were to earn $100,000 in Australia, you would be paying an effective tax rate of 23%, which will leave you with an after-tax income of $77,212. And when you do the same for New Zealand, so 100,000 Australian dollars or 108,000 New Zealand dollars, you would get taxed at an effective tax rate of 25.3%, bringing you home $74,665, 3.8% less than the Aussies after-tax income. Therefore, on an average income of 100,000 AUD, you will keep more left over in Australia, not to mention that Australian companies also contribute an amount equals to 12% of your salary to your superannuation for retirement, while in New Zealand, you have to sacrifice your pre-tax salary to do so. However, having a higher average pay won't really mean much if it costs more to live in Australia, right? Let's find out more. Now, before we continue, if you guys are enjoying this video and would like more insights about personal finance, real estate, property, stock, and crypto, make sure to follow my newsletter in my description down below. Alright, let's get back to the next point, being cost of living in both countries. In this case, we'll be using the Big Mac Index for comparison. So what is the Big Mac Index, you might ask? The Big Mac Index is an informal economic indicator to gauge the purchasing power between different currencies using the price of a Big Mac in each of those countries. Now in Australia, the Big Mac Index is starting at $7.9 compared to $7.72 for New Zealand. So from this alone, you can kind of partly think that the cost of living is cheaper in New Zealand compared to Australia. However, the Big Mac Index might not be the most accurate representation of the cost of living, and here's why. Firstly, the Big Mac Index is way too narrow, meaning it only reflects the price of one fast food item and does not reflect the broader consumer prices like rent, healthcare, transport, and utilities. Therefore, we need a better way to include these other aspects, and that's why I use Numbeo. Now, Numbeo is a platform that gives you all of that. This includes different types of groceries, utilities, drinks, transportation, rent, etc, etc. Now, according to Numbeo, the cost of living in Auckland, New Zealand is 10.3% lower than in Sydney, excluding rent. But when you include rent, cost of living in Auckland is actually 20.3% lower than Sydney. So I think this is enough to kind of tell you how expensive Sydney rent really is. But aside from rent, restaurant prices in Auckland are 1.4% lower, and grocery prices in Auckland are 9.4% lower. So from what I said alone, we can see while the average pay in New Zealand is 20% lower, it's actually 20.3% cheaper to live there in New Zealand. Now let's move on to house prices. Now you probably have already heard about how crazily expensive properties in Sydney are. As a matter of fact, Sydney is in the top 9 most expensive cities when it comes to real estate, while Auckland is all the way in the top 32. Let's dig a bit deeper. In Sydney, the average price for a 3-bedroom house is $1.6 million, and in Auckland, the average is $1.1 million. Therefore, Sydney's houses are actually 45% more expensive than in Auckland. Now, how about rent? Let's say for comparison, we are renting a 1-bedroom apartment in the center CBD of the city of Sydney and Auckland. So in Sydney, a 1-month rent would cost you $3,329 compared to $1,965 in Auckland, a whopping 41% cheaper. Now let's go to number 6 on our list, transportation. Now in Sydney, a one-way ticket train ride on average will cost you $5, while in Auckland, the same ride will only cost you $4.25. However, this is a different case when it comes to gasoline, where a liter will cost you $1.87 in Sydney compared to $2.54 in Auckland, a 35.4% increase. Now lastly, let's talk about utility bills. In Sydney, the basics like electricity, heating, cooling, and water for a 85-meter-square apartment cost anywhere around $315 a month. But in Auckland, it's 29.6% cheaper at $219.93 a month. A mobile phone monthly plan with calls and 10 gigabytes of data will cost you on average $36 a month in Sydney compared to $46 a month in Auckland, 27.7% more expensive. Now speaking about mobile phone plans, we can't forget internet bills. With 60 megabytes per second or more, unlimited data, cable and ADSL, it will cost you $80 a month in Sydney, but only $70 a month in Auckland. Well, there you have it. Do let me know what you think of this issue in the comment section down below, and if you want to see more like this, follow my channel for more.